Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Bystrak. I'm the Superintendent of Schools for the West Seneca Central School District. If you're tuning in right now, you're tuning in for a virtual forum that we're having on the reopening of schools. It is, just in case anybody's watching this in the future, it's Monday, August 31st at noon. And we actually picked, a question actually came in about why we picked an afternoon as opposed to an evening. We've already done a number of evening events, and we thought, based on some feedback we got from some parents, that an afternoon one around lunchtime would be a good idea. So that's why we selected this time frame. As always, we're going to be continuing to communicate plans for the resumption of education and our classes and everything, throughout the course of the school year. Really, over the next several weeks and months, it's going to be critical, obviously, as we're starting the year remotely this year. But I just wanted everybody to understand kind of the rationale for today's meeting. And I'm also joined today by our Assistant Superintendent for Exceptional Education, Mrs. Jackie Fowler. She's sitting over here. Kind of the format is be very similar to the last two meetings that we've done, where I've got a number of questions that have been emailed into there's an email address for people that have questions. So I've got a number of questions and areas to address, and then Ms. Fowler is going to be reading, as we have time, some questions that might be coming in live. So I can tell you the questions have been they've been great questions, honestly, very solution focused, very much focused on kind of how do we get this done, what does this look like? And some of these questions, honestly, they were asked maybe a few days ago and are already in the process of being answered through different communications that are being sent out by the district. So, but I'm going to jump right in here with just a few of the areas to talk about. One area in particular came back to elementary and the elementary scheduling. First, I just want to say that we sent a communication out last Thursday afternoon, just kind of outlining in a little bit more detail of an approach the elementary and what the schedules would look like. As I've said before, elementary scheduling is a much more nuanced activity, because students in many cases require a little bit of support, especially at the primary grades, to log in and be present virtually. So those schedules, we also have a little bit more flexibility built into them as well. Somebody asked questions specifically for kindergartners, but I would actually expand the question and say whether it's somebody in pre-K or kindergarten or first grade, that your younger grades, if kids have difficulty accessing, we are fully aware that even that the person that your child might be in the care of may not have the same capacity to be able to help them log into the Chromebook and to be able to access the education. So teachers in many cases are going to be posting a lot of things in their Google Classroom. There'll be some videos as well, and there'll also be plenty of live opportunities for interaction as well through Google Classroom. Teachers are going to have office hours. Somebody was concerned, is my child going to be is their grade going to be adversely affected? If I have a third grader that maybe isn't logging in at the exact the time that they're doing some of the small group instruction every day? The answer is no to that question. That's not how it works. Again, we understand that our elementary students might need a little bit of additional support in being able to access the education. And I think, if I could speak broadly, that once we get moving on the school year, and that teachers are in communication with families, I think it's going to become very apparent. It'll be a little less abstract. We put out 3 schedules last week. One was kind of the overall approach to elementary scheduling, and then one was a sample week at a glance that a teacher would be sending out every week, kind of saying, here's kind of what we're going to be doing this week. And then the next one was even more finite, just an example of a teacher's sample schedule. Now, those last 2 schedules I described, the week at a glance and the teacher's day, could look very different depending on teachers, but the teachers also have the flexibility to be able to kind of craft those schedules to some degree based on the individual needs of their classes. If they're finding that a particular group of students really has a greater ability maybe later in the day as opposed to in the morning, then the teacher's probably going to adjust to be able to adapt to that. So there was some concern issued as well about kids sitting, for hours staring at screens, and we're very sensitive to that as well. So what I would say, and this goes for all of our levels, even though at the secondary level there's more structured time buckets that the kids have in there, I don't anticipate every single day kids checking in the morning and just being in Google Meets all day long. It just doesn't work that way. In some cases, some of the activities, just like if you were in a regular classroom setting, are going to be a little bit more independent, where the teacher will start off and there'll be a lesson, and then the student may have to do some independent work and the teacher may check back, but it's not all going to be staring at a computer screen for the entire day. And to get back to the elementary a little bit too, there's one distinction I want to be able to draw. So the 5th grade on the east side of town is in the middle school. Now, those students, those families should be receiving schedules, in the mail. They'll be receiving communications in the mail. It looks a little bit different. It's the middle school schedule on the west side of town. So that would be, Allendale, Winchester, and West Elementary. Those are going to follow that elementary fifth grade schedule that we had sent out. So there's an important distinction to be made there. So. Some of the questions that we had too in terms about materials. Will we be sending any materials out to students? The short answer is yes. We understand that whether they be spirals, and this goes for all grade levels, but I think the question that I was asked was more specific to elementary schools. The question really was, if kids need, materials, whether they be books or whatever it is, it's going to be a combination of us creating opportunities for parents to drive up and pick things up, which could also be opportunities to meet with teachers as well, just to at least see faces. And also, in some cases, we'll be utilizing our transportation department to be able to assist in distributing materials as well. So it's going to be a kind of a multifaceted approach, and we really need to get into the school year a little bit too to see what the need is going to be, but we're prepared to be able to do both. And that was actually another question too that was asked of us in a couple of different venues, not just with elementary, but they were asking about, are we going to be creating opportunities for meet and greets? And the answer is yes. We're actually doing some of them as we speak right now. So buildings individually are communicating with families regarding, plans for meet and greets, whether it be an orientation type setup or whether it be, an actual physically, coming to the school, standing under a tent at a safe social distance, using appropriate, CDC guidance with masks and things like that. But getting a chance to really, to see who your teachers are, your children's teachers are. And I would look for more opportunities that are going to be happening in the coming, weeks and, in time that we're going to be in any kind of a remote model. So. A couple other questions that we have too. Somebody was asking, again, great question about the weeks at a glance. So how are teachers, and again, this is, the secondary will be doing this to a degree as well, but the elementaries are going to really rely on this. The week at a glance, the sample that we sent out last Thursday, how will that be communicated? So I would say it's going to depend on the teacher. It could be placed in a Google Classroom. It could be an email communication sent out to families, but it could be something on their website. But individual teachers will be reaching out to families to let them know and to kind of also, gain a sense from those families as to what the most appropriate venue for them to be able to receive this information is. So our teachers are actually back in the buildings this week, and families can expect to be hearing from teachers, making phone calls, reaching out. In some cases, when we've already communicated some opportunities for families actually to meet with their teachers. So you're going to be hearing from our teachers. And again, I guess I'll stress that this is going to seem a little less abstract once the year gets up and running. Just to jump into another question as well, and I'm going to try to stay with maybe some of the technology standpoint, the side of things here about Chromebooks. So right now, we are in the process of doing a Chromebook distribution. So this is our middle and high schools right now is what we're focusing on this week. The schedule was sent out last week, but lots of questions, good questions from families. So for instance, who's getting a Chromebook? Everyone gets a Chromebook. All right, so we've purchased enough. Again, we've reallocated resources that we've had within our own technology budget, and we've secured enough Chromebooks. And again, I will say very fortunately, we were able to get ours in. There are some districts, unfortunately, that were not able to get their Chromebooks in time and maybe not have them until October or November even for that matter, but we have ours. So we're in the process of deploying them to our secondary this week, and the plan is for next week on Tuesday to deploy them to our elementary students. So more information will be forthcoming with that, but that opportunity also presents itself as an ability to be able to see teachers face to face as well when it comes to the elementary. So great question on that as well. Lots of questions on can people use their own device? So if you've got a Chromebook you've already purchased for your child, this is a little bit more nuanced of an answer. I will say yes. I mean, you can still, if you've got a Chromebook or some other device and you can still access Google Classroom, you certainly can. And I will say that all of our accounts through Google Classroom, they're all account-based. So we'll be able to support, our students, and they'll be filtered. There'll be security filters, all the same that would exist as if they were using one of our devices. Maybe some of the potential drawbacks, which I say potential because it's not necessarily going to be a drawback, is that we would have potentially less ability to be able to provide support to families if they're using their own device. Like, for instance, if it's one of our Chromebooks, we can really get in there and troubleshoot if there's some sort of a functionality issue. Obviously, if it's not our device, we have less ability to be able to do that. Also, I will say that Google pushes out, and I'm going to speak, I guess, a little bit technically here. I don't want to get too far out of my depth, but they push out operating system updates on a regular basis. So they put them out and we push them down into our devices. So it's not to say that you won't have some of those updates, but it's to say that we can't guarantee them to the same way we would be if we were using our own devices. So just, I'd say that, you probably can use your own devices to the extent that you're comfortable, but you will have a district-issued Chromebook as well, which was what we're recommending that people use, just so that you have our full support in terms of being able to move through some of these products. So, somebody asked the question: are we going to be assigning Google accounts? Yes, Google accounts. We'll be assigning them, and this is another thing too that I think is going to become a little less abstract over the next week or so as we make these deployments. There'll be instructions on how to access, your Chromebook and your accounts. Somebody had asked the question, and this is not just elementary or secondary, this is everyone, how are the kids going to know, how are they going to get into their meetings? And this could happen a couple of different ways, really. A teacher, depending on, what their preference would be, may just post, maybe this may be more likely to occur at the secondary level, but on their teacher webpage may just post, here's the code for this class. If it's an algebra class, period 2, here's the code that students can continually log into to be able to get to that class. If it's, maybe more likely at an elementary level where it's more of a limited number of students for an elementary teacher, but that they see for across a variety of subjects, they may actually send out emails. And we have everybody's Gmail, but it's important that students are using their district Gmail. Okay, if using your own Gmail isn't going to work, you're not going to be able to get into our Google Classrooms. So it's going to be very important that you use our district Gmail. On that note, I will say that one of the things that's going to be really important too is that you go to our websites. So we've been working on something, a Go page. Now the Go page, that's G-O, is something that we created actually back when schools first closed last year. And it was just, it's kind of a warehouse on our district website for ways to support families and students, in accessing their education. It had tips and links and things like that. This Go page has been greatly expanded. So if you go to our homepage for the district and click on any one of the schools, whatever school, if it's Allendale, if it's Clinton Street, if it's West Senior, the top left corner of the navigation bar says the word Go. Click on that, and there's going to be some great information for families. There are video tutorials, step-by-step video tutorials of how to access Google Classroom, how to log in, troubleshooting if you have problems. There's actually something called the Family Academy, which is just, again, a plethora of resources that families can utilize and students can utilize to make sure that they are, fully able to access their Google Classroom and get things done. So I just want to say that that's going to be something that's very important from the standpoint of just making sure that you're current with that. And that page is going to continue to expand and evolve. So just, to keep that in mind, to keep checking that page. It'll also, list all the different apps and functionality that we have utilized. We have very specific criteria for all of our, anything that we use, any apps that we use have to be what's called Education Law 2D compliant, which basically is just a protection for students and families that we're not going to inappropriately, or any vendor that we contract with isn't going to pass along sensitive information. So that's something that it's a relatively new law. It's been talked about a lot, but so any of these applications that we use need to be Ed Law 2D compliant. So as far as some of the expectations that we might have for our students, I want to make sure I can keep talking, so I'll drink some water here, but the whole idea of etiquette, online etiquette, comes into play. So essentially, students and families should just know that our current code of conduct is still in effect. If you're online, all right, we still expect you to conduct yourself appropriately. That means, using appropriate language, being respectful toward one another, being present, being engaged. We will be sending out some specific tips and expectations for students, but just to touch on some of the bigger hitters, we need you to be ready and be on time. Be ready to learn. So now, I think it was just my last meeting that I had, my last virtual forum, we talked a little bit about some of the built-in flexibility that some students may need to have, whether they're taking care of a younger sibling or maybe need some assistance in in accessing some of the classes. But I would say the starting point is be there and be on time, and then work with your teacher individually if there's some specific accommodation that you need. The other thing too, and this may sound simple, but make sure your device is charged or plugged in. I can tell you on a number of different occasions, I may have been guilty of myself at one point or two in over the past several months in some meetings, but you just got to make sure that you're not just all of a sudden going to lose power, throughout the course of your meetings. So just another important tip. Also be prepared, have your materials ready for you. That's another important thing as well, that, if you're working on something, make sure you have it readily available to you so that you don't have to say, oh, wait, I'll be right back and run to the kitchen and grab it. And on that note too, one of the questions that had come up to us is, what's an appropriate workspace for students in terms of where they're going to participate in their Google Classroom? And I would say that's, it's got to be appropriate. That's very much situationally dependent. I think in some cases, someone might say, well, a basement's a more appropriate place. In other places, it might be the kitchen table. It really depends on, a few factors. Is it a distraction-free or relatively distraction-free environment? If there's lots of commotion going on, that's probably not going to be your best place to learn, nor would it be anyway. Like our classes, we don't, if you're in a classroom, we try to minimize distractions and noise and things like that. So I would just say that's going to be very situationally dependent. If you have questions, though, or if you're not sure, that's where you talk to your teacher. And they can give you some tips, some suggestions on how to create a good workspace for yourself. Getting back to some of the expectations, though, understand, too, that any device that we give you a Chromebook, and this goes for students or for anyone, really, is that the device is intended for school purposes only. So I'll stress that. People shouldn't be surfing the internet. People shouldn't be, on Amazon or anything like that, purchasing stuff. It really, the device is strictly for school purposes. So, and I will say that if somebody's logged into their school account, we're seeing everything. So I think from that standpoint, just understand that, those devices are just for school purposes. Getting back to I guess we'll call our dress code, students should be dressed appropriately. That means being, having, not having any inappropriate shirts or, hats or anything that are inappropriate on. You just got to make sure that you're conducting yourself just as if you were in school. I know I said this before, but be focused. I think one of the things, it's one of the blessings, I think, of Google Meet that we found was that we can, quickly get together and meet in a safe way, that we're not together in this big, confined space. And it really does. It allows us to, kind of toggle between different worlds rather quickly. But one of the other things that I personally have noticed myself too is that it also enables you to sort of, check out a little bit. And maybe you're checking, your phone or something like that. Not something you want to be doing. If you're in class, you're in class. So it's really important to be present and be engaged in the class. Another tip too, which I'm sure many have learned by now, is mute yourself when you're not speaking. That's one of the things that I think can be very distracting. I think we've all been a part of Zooms or Google Meets or whatever, where somebody didn't realize that their mic was on and the UPS guy shows up and the dogs are barking and it gets very distracting. Just make sure that you're muted if you're not speaking. So, and I would encourage all of our teachers or all of our students to make sure there's some different functions which your teacher will go over you, but you can even raise your hand, and in some sections your teachers will say, oh, okay, Johnny has his hand raised, or put things in the chat. That's another useful tool as well. Your teacher's going to spend a good deal of time, though, over the first couple of weeks of class, though, kind of orienting all the students and kind of talking about, what the preferred method for, communication is. So it may not always be everybody just talking at once, but in some cases, it might be, okay, everybody unmute yourselves and let's have a conversation. So it's really going to depend on the class and on the specific needs of the class and maybe even that day. And I'm also going to say, too, just as with everything in this, what we're saying today may change a little bit tomorrow. I mean, this is all new and uncharted territory. And whether you're, remote 5 days a week or 3 days a week, this is new for everyone. So, I will say that we're going to be learning best practices from not only internal, like our own colleagues, but colleagues across the area. We've already learned quite a bit over the past few months. And I think it's going to be really important that we continue to keep our ears open, our eyes open, and learn from best practices. So your teacher may start off the year communicating, one thing, but may have to pivot. And I guess I would just ask that everybody be patient and understand the need to be able to do that. So one of the important things, too, that I really want to drive home, too, again, I mentioned this earlier, but the idea of being respectful. Now, when I say being respectful doesn't just mean that, you don't do anything overtly disrespectful, like use inappropriate language or call somebody a name. But I guess I mean, too, is just, again, giving your undivided attention to the class. It's out of respect for your classmates as well as your teachers. And the other thing, too, is that no one should be recording anyone else during these times. We still have privacy. Just like if you were sitting in class, you shouldn't have your phone out recording something. I would expect the same would go within Google Classroom as well, with any of our remote learning as well. And we will address things too. There shouldn't be photographs or recording and things like that. the same rules still apply. So it's very important. One of the other things too to keep in mind is that just even just being cognizant of your own body language too, just as if you were sitting in the classroom. Understand that people are looking at you on a screen, and we do expect that our students have their videos on, unless your teacher suggests otherwise. You should have your videos on. Your teachers has to be able to monitor you and ask questions, and they're going to be looking at you as well. We actually have some ability that if a student, one of the things about Google Classroom is that it kind of goes to where the noise is. So right now we have the ability to view about 16 squares at a time. Well, if you had a class of 20, 25 people, you're not seeing everybody all at the same time. But if a particular student is doing some sort of presentation or speaking, teacher can actually, I think they call it pinning, where they can actually lock in on a student and keep that student right there on the screen so that they can continually see them. So again, we're going to learn more about the functionality of this this platform as we move forward, but it's going to be really important that that we're demonstrating good etiquette here. So what I would just say is, whether it's you meeting with an entire class or you just with maybe it's a teacher in a small group, regardless of how it is, it's going to be really important that you make sure that you're conducting yourself appropriately. And again, more information to come. Your teacher is going to spend quite a bit of time helping to sort of orient our students. So. All right. Okay. Oh, also I would add to parents or students, if you ever have a concern, something doesn't seem right to you, again, the same thing that would apply as if you were in the school day. I would say communicate with the school. Talk with the teacher if you need to. Contact the building principal. Those structures are still in place. All right. If you have a concern about something to do with the social emotional wellness or of your child, make sure you reach out to the school counselor, the social worker. You can never go wrong by reaching out to the school. Ultimately, it's going to be important that people continue to stay connected and and ask questions and seek out support. It may look a little bit different because maybe you're talking on the phone or over a Google Meet, but ultimately the support is still going to be there. I had a question from somebody saying, hey, my child participates, and sometimes they do groups, lunch bunch groups and things with the social worker. I would say that those things will still be able to continue, to the extent that, that the social workers are feeling that's an appropriate pedagogical practice. But, those sort of things can still happen, but we just need to take some additional steps to ensure that we're, being private, and that, if a student is, engaged in some discussion like that, they're in a safe place to be able to have those discussions. So. All right, so one of the questions came on, and this question was asked, and I think it's appropriate. As everyone knows, and as we've communicated, our plan is not to be fully remote, until Thanksgiving. Our plan is to really work to be able to target specific groups, to be able to start to phase back in well in advance of that deadline, to the extent that it's appropriate. We want to, kind of get in there and get all of our teachers very comfortable and our staff comfortable with some of the protocols that we would have in place, and develop some new protocols for having people in the building so that we can do it in a safer, more progressive manner. But there were some questions about, well, what if a staff member or a student were to test positive for COVID-19? And I guess I'm just going to answer this question, whether we're in a hybrid model or in some full virtual or whatever it would be. This is the process that really wouldn't change, based on what the Erie County Department of Health has told us, and we've been in frequent communication with them. It's likely that if somebody does have a positive test, we're going to hear from that person pretty quickly. If we don't, we'd hear from the Department of Health pretty quickly as well. The reason that initial contact is so important, if it's a member of our school community, is that our administrators, basically our building principals, and in some cases our school nurses, are active members of what they call the contact tracing team. So what does that mean? So contact tracing basically is, that the Erie County Health Department has people whose, expertise is asking questions of people who have been diagnosed. So for instance, if it's a staff member that's diagnosed, Erie County Department of Health is going to be in contact with that staff member as well as the building principal to identify who else may have come in close proximity to that individual who tested positive, and then they will be in touch with anyone they feel would be at risk. So I will say, that you might be wondering, well, how is it that we'll be notified if somebody tests positive? That would be entirely up to the Department of Health. We would, rely on them to be able to help us appropriately communicate and obviously be in compliance. We would also have to be in compliance with different laws that were in place in terms of health privacy laws and things like that. Those don't go out the window. Sorry, the lights click off if we don't move enough. I'll keep moving a little bit more so the lights don't turn off on us. But I will say that that's something that the Erie County Health Department is going to have to be active. They would really take the lead on any kind of testing. that were to take place, and also communication as well. They would direct us, if and when it's appropriate for us to be able to communicate. So, it's hard. It's funny. I've had conversations with them, and really they're very situational in terms of, when, who is considered to be at risk. There's some terminology or some phraseology that if someone is within 6 feet of someone for, less than for 10 minutes or more, and if they're not wearing a mask, or in some cases if they are wearing a mask, that person could potentially be at risk. But that's going to be a case-based determination on the Department of Health standpoint. So we're really going to have to rely on them. We've been in active communication with the Department of Health as well as our district physician. I feel that as of this point, as we're bringing more people back to our campus, there is a likelihood that, someone could test positive. And I think that's where, we do have protocols in place. I just outlined them. And, obviously, we would tell anybody if they were a member of our school community, the second we hear that they've tested positive, or for that matter, experiencing symptoms, you stay home. All right. So step one is don't be here. We don't want you on campus. And then again, we'd work with the Department of Health. We would do a deep and thorough cleaning of any areas that we needed to. We would potentially shut down an area if we needed to shut down that area for a little while, but that would be based on Department of Health guidelines. So, and they have a pretty good handle on, when they feel that those sort of activities would be appropriate. So. Somebody asked a question about why the SATs were canceled. So the district was scheduled, and we've been on the books, on the calendar for a few months now to run the SATs. Actually, I believe it was this past weekend. Unfortunately, we did not have the ability to meet the capacity of students that they were going to be sending to us. So, we'd been in communication probably since June, just, kind of making them aware that the number that they had scheduled here had exceeded what we were able to handle in district. And they just, I think, given whatever pressures that, they're experiencing, we weren't able to accommodate the SATs at this time. So that's where the college boards and our school work to try to help reschedule kids for the SATs as appropriate. But again, it really comes down to starting off with safety. So just very similar to why we couldn't run them, couldn't run other tests back in the spring as well. So. Somebody asked a question about remote learning for the year. So basically somebody's saying that in the event that we do, enter like a hybrid model, or let's say somebody's group is recommended to, I say group, but let's say it's, students, as I mentioned before, students that are English language learners. Let's say they're, identified as a group that we're looking to be able to bring back in sooner. That we would that if someone would wanted to have a fully remote option, the answer to that question would be yes. Right now, the current guidance suggests that anybody that wants a fully remote option should be entitled to that remote option. One of the questions that was also asked though, and I think I may have talked about this a little bit at the last session, was, does somebody have to commit to a year? Initially, we had said you have to commit to the full year. I think in that situation, I think we would revisit that. So, just to try to give people a little bit of flexibility, and I mean, the difficult decision on that, I'm just going to, be completely upfront, is that it drives, the way that we allocate our resources. So if we just tell everyone you can come right back in, even if you're fully remote, come right back in whenever you want to, that could potentially impact our ability to, keep kids in school in a socially distant manner. So that's why it's not we really have to take a look at our abilities and our capacities as well. It could drive staffing. We also have limited space as well. Our buildings are all pretty comfortably full. There are not too many kids, not an overabundance of space. We're at a good place right now in terms of, the size of our buildings and the population of our buildings. So another question came up about academy programming, and someone asked the question, and really I think what they're trying to get to is, our academies, this is at the high school level, how are kids going to be meaningfully engaged in the educational process with some of these classes that, may in many cases be very kind of hands-on in learning, or just, a little more interactive. So, and I'm actually going to expand this question to any of our classes. Someone also asked about chorus or band or orchestra. How are these things going to be run? What I will say is that it's going to depend to some degree on the department and the individual instructor as well. But I can tell you that all of our folks are absolutely committed to putting out a good program for our students. I don't want to speculate too much. I can just tell you, though, that there is dialogue that's happening as we speak and that will continue to happen about how we can engage kids meaningfully. One of the questions was science labs. I know at the secondary, high school level, there's a requirement that kids have a certain amount of science labs and kind of hours and minutes that they have to participate in. We have gotten some flexibility in the way that those labs can be delivered. So that's where it gets comes to our teachers to sit and look at some really creative ways that we can engage students in meaningful hands-on activities that are safe, obviously, in a remote manner. So, I would say that if anybody's watched some of the videos that have been pushed out over the past, several months from some of our music department, just some amazing, singing or instrumentals and things like that, where you have a whole bunch of students on a screen participating, you may imagine it might be something like that. And on that note too, somebody asked the question about what about small group instruction or, your academic intervention services? Or even resource room for that matter. Now, resource room is a special education service. That means no more than 5 students and one special education teacher at a time. But somebody asked, can those things still happen? 100%. They absolutely will. And it would be the same sort of manner as Google Classroom is currently set up as other teachers would be doing. It would just be in smaller groups. And in many cases, now I'll leave the resource room aside for a second because that's an IEP service. We don't wait to start those in the school year. But when you talk about other things like academic intervention support services or, some sort of, whether it be reading support or math support, whatever it is, to some extent, we have to be able to understand which students are in need of those things. And then our AIS teachers or our teachers that may be providing AIS would work to develop individual groups or smaller groups to be able to work with students. I will say one of the benefits, we talk about remote learning, or at least this model that we're utilizing, is that teachers do have the ability to be able to say, okay, I've got students that are all home at this point and they're safely supervised at, in their homes. So what we can do is, okay, I'm going to work with these 4 kids or these 5 kids for a little while and then check back later in the class period, or designating a period of time, whether it be during office hours or, a hole in the student's schedule. We'll have a little bit more flexibility to be able to schedule some of those more personalized interventions. And speaking honestly as a former middle school principal, I can tell you that in many cases, when students need extra support after a class, maybe not even formal AIS we're talking about here, in many cases it's a 5-minute conversation that they just need to follow up with a teacher. And I would say that those opportunities are going to be in high abundance there. They're not going to be worried about the class bell ringing as much, or those office hours are going to afford a wide variety of wide degree of latitude for teachers to be able to answer those quick 2-minute questions, 5-minute questions for students. Sometimes that's all it really takes, just to, okay, I've got all the puzzle pieces except one, I just need a little bit more support. So again, those things are still going to be happening. Go back to my first page here too. I'm jumping around a little bit, but trying to make this make sense. Here's an interesting question. Somebody asked about college exploration. So this is about the time that our seniors are going to be starting to really think about colleges and what opportunities they might have. We still have school counselors. Our school counselors are still going to be very heavily engaged in supporting our students as they make applications to college and the college application process. So that doesn't go away. That doesn't change. It may look a little bit different, but that is still a critical function of our school counselors, especially at the high school level, obviously. But these are still things that are going to be happening. Just like scheduling conversations are going to be happening as well. If there's a student that's struggling with something, our school counselors are still going to be the same resource they've always been. They're going to support the way that they provide that support may look a little bit different, but these are going to be important activities that are going to still continue. While we are in any kind of remote setting, whether it be hybrid or, a full remote. So, all right. Ms. Fowler, did you have a couple of questions? I'm doing a lot of talking here, but I wonder if Mrs. Fowler has any questions that she's getting from people as they're emailing in.
Sure. I don't know if this is on. One of the questions is related to credits to graduate at the high school level, and how will students earn those credits given that we were closed in March and now with this remote option?
Okay, good question. So credits are still going to be awarded in the same way. It's interesting, back when in like June when they were, the state was trying to facilitate some dialogue about, what schools might look like in the fall, as they asked questions of school districts. What sort of, they call it mandate relief, but what sorts of things do you need to be able to support students? And one of the things that we said was potentially giving us some degree of mandate relief in terms of the number of hours that may be required in a given year, and what counts as a day of attendance, things like that. But it also goes to credit as well. I mean, school districts can award credit to students if they feel they've met the criteria. And as I said in one of our previous virtual forums, the way that we're going to be operating is basically based on our standard grading protocols. So our standard grading protocols are going to be utilized. Now, built within those protocols is a degree of flexibility that teachers have always had in terms of how they award credit for a class or an assignment, but that's how we're starting. So students are still going to accrue credits in the same way. We've not made any programmatic cuts at this point. We're still offering a full host of electives, so we're not going to have kids that are going to be scheduled shy of credits. And so just to put that out there.
Similar to that, a parent just wrote in saying, I'm hearing conflicting information regarding transportation to and from Potter, I believe our career and technical program. Is the district providing transportation?
Great question. And I'm going to expand your question a little bit. I'm glad you brought it up. So with transportation, so we have students, for anybody that doesn't know this, that participate in career and technical education through Erie One BOCES. The Potter Road site is one of the main hubs for that. And yes, we will be providing transportation. So to and from. So we'll pick your child up in the morning and we will drive them home. As I mentioned before in another forum, Potters has the ability to work out of not just Potters, but the career and technical programs. Any program where we're sending students has the ability. They all have the same criteria from the state to be able to operate in a way that's safe, with students being socially distanced and having protocols. So we have the ability to be able to transport to and from. So the big difference is going to be we're sending kids directly home. We're taking kids directly home after their Potters experience or their CTE experience, as opposed to bringing them back to the schools. So yes, we're doing that. And also that goes for our parochial schools as well, or any out-of-district placements. If a student goes to program placement because they require special programming through like a Committee on Special Education, we are still transporting to those programs. And most of them are operating in like a hybrid format, but we're still transporting to the extent that they need to be transported. So our transportation system is still going to be busy. We're still going to be getting kids to and from.
Another question came in, actually a couple questions came in about school supplies. Is there an updated supply list, or are there things that students may or may not need?
Yes. So that's going to be very much based, I will say, by building and by teacher. But at the end of the day, I would say, when in doubt, you can certainly reach out to the schools, but they have the supply list there. Students are still going to be expected at some point or another to be able to utilize them. The teachers have worked to pare them down to some extent. But, I would say even for the immediate moment, I say immediate meaning September, there's going to be a need to have some of these supplies. And I think it's going to become very apparent once, families start having conversations with teachers, which supplies are going to be the most essential right now, but also keeping in mind that we're working on trying to get back into, more of an in-person model of education and instruction. It would be good to have those in mind and be able to be purchasing some of those supplies.
Similar to that, there are a few questions about agenda books or the planners that the students will be using, and will there be an option for those students to be able to receive their planner? Yeah,
I believe that the school district, the buildings are still working to develop those planners and those agendas to be able to get them out. So.
Another question about if your child is absent due to an illness or being out of town for some reason, what would be the process?
Great question. So basically, you'd still have to get them a note. So we are taking attendance on a daily basis for our students. Now, as I mentioned, I think, another forum, for the elementary students, it may be that you're checking in a little bit later in the day, but teachers will do the look back kind of on the week, so to speak, to see, okay, did the student, check in every day? But, for our middle and high school, they'll be in the morning checking in, into their first period classes, essentially. So if a student's absent for a reason, it would just be a matter of sending in a note. You'd probably email the note in, would be just fine. But send it to, I would say, you'll probably want to send it to maybe send it to the teacher, and then from there it's possible that we may start diverting some of those notes to like our main office. Typically, if somebody's missed a day of school, and I know when I was at West Middle School, for instance, we had an attendance clerk that received all of those notes. I would imagine it'll probably go to that at some point, but for now, just making sure that you're communicating in writing the reason for the absence.
Another question came in. This one is about study halls. Why are they in the schedule, and expectations for attendance during study hall?
Yeah. So the study halls are still in the schedules, and we're speaking about the secondary level, so middle and high school. They're still in the schedule right now because essentially those schedules are created that if we are able to bring people back in person when we do, that they can walk right into their schedules. So it really won't be much of a shift other than, for the middle school, condensing it back to one day again, as opposed to over a 2-day span. There is no expectation that your students are sitting in study halls. I know some kids that are rule followers, they're going to want to do that, but we're not staffing study halls. It's not a very good use of anybody's time. So I would suggest that if a student has a study hall scheduled into their day, that they utilize that for something else, whether it be other homework, maybe they're connecting with a teacher, or maybe having their lunch, whatever it is they want to be able to do. We do build in lunches into the schedule too, but I would say you have some flexibility as a student, as a family, with study halls.
Another question was about flexibility in terms of if students are not able to log on during the day, what would that flexibility look like?
Sure, and this is a big one. I start off by coming up by saying we're taking this kind of approach that we have a schedule, we expect people to follow it. And I know let's just parse out elementary and secondary a little bit. So for your elementary students, we fully understand, I know I mentioned this earlier, but we fully understand that, some students might need a little bit more assistance in logging into or accessing, through Google Classroom than others. So there is flexibility that's built in. For the elementaries, we do have some designated time buckets that the teachers will use, but again, those time buckets may change a little bit depending on the needs of the class. Again, there's going to be a combination of recorded items, but also just lessons that are put into Google Classroom and different resources and links to different things, so that students can stay busy and productive throughout the course of the day, and that when they do finally, let's say it's not until later in the afternoon that they can really truly log in, they have the support from mom or dad or whoever it is, that when they log in later in the day, there'll be something meaningful for them to be able to log into. So I would say what I would encourage, though, is to the maximum degree possible, though, we try to get kids, during the daytime, checked in and logged in. And I'm not kidding, the Go page that we've created that is, again, it's housed in every building's web page, their home page, really does make it very user friendly. I know some have said to me, hey, it's my mom or my dad that are watching, my son or daughter, so it's grandma or grandpa during the day, and they don't necessarily, feel comfortable logging in. I think if you sit together and watch some of these videos, the level of comfort may increase dramatically, and I'm always surprised and impressed by how quickly our students are able to, to understand some of the technology around them. I still look at my 13-year-old daughter and my 10-year-old daughter as being unbelievable whizzes when it comes to knowing how to access some of these things. So I think, that we may have a greater ability to log in during the day than some might suspect. But that said, there is that flexibility, and I mentioned it from the secondary standpoint that we understand that students may have, another obligation helping out a younger sibling or something along those lines. That there is some flexibility, but that would really come from a conversation with the teacher, and they'd work that out with the teacher. So again, it's not that you can miss algebra every day, but what sort of flexibility do you need? And I would say again, unprecedented times. Well, then we're gonna have to have some conversations about how we go about supporting our students in meeting those requirements. So. Somebody actually along those lines too, somebody asked the question, are the teachers live with students? So I think I may have answered that here, but just in case I didn't, a Google Meet, essentially what that is, and again, go to those Go pages, you'll see what they are, but a Google Meet is a teacher sitting live with the students, so the teacher is going to be, sitting in their classroom talking to our students, actively, involved in the educational process. So, it is real time. And now there will also be some instances where it could be a recorded mini lesson or something like that, and where the student kind of is front loaded with some information so that when they come into the live interaction with the teachers, they kind of hit the ground running. Somebody else had asked the question too about at the elementary level. I think this was geared more toward the elementary level, but they were talking about specials and phys ed. For instance, our phys ed teachers are extremely scheduled. Just as an example, they're busy. They're some of the busier people in the district in terms of their schedules. And the way that we're structuring this is there'll be one, like for elementaries, one live session per week where they're interacting physically with the phys ed teacher, and then there's going to be a combination of some live but also some recorded items as well for our students to be able to engage in different PE activities. So there's going to be opportunities for our students to be able to engage with their teachers. And I would say again, just like any other teacher, communicate. If there's something, if there's feedback that you have to give, then it's feedback that we need to receive, and how we can make this a better educational experience for everyone. That goes for every teacher, every member of our staff. It's not just an algebra teacher in high school. It's not just an elementary teacher in third grade. It's our special area teachers, PE, music, art. These people are passionate about what they do, and they want to make sure that they are engaging your child, your children, in the highest quality educational experience that they can. So, and there's going to be some trial and error. I'm just going to tell everyone right off the get-go. I mean, no district in the history of, I guess I'll say this country, I'll limit it to that, has ever had the perfect start to a school year. So we're going to have some bumps starting off the year. While we might be much more familiar and comfortable with the technology that we're utilizing, there's still a lot of moving pieces here. So day one, day two, the first, few days, we're going to iron out some of the kinks. We're going to realize some areas that, okay, we're going to have to zig instead of zag. But I ask everyone to be patient with each other, with us, with yourselves as well. I remember last year talking to a mom who clearly took, the educational process very seriously, and that to her credit. And I'd spoken with her at length. And, she was really, she was frankly being very, she had a lot of expectations for herself, for the school, for her child. and her child, she did not feel was maybe living up to those expectations. And I just, I look at it from my standpoint that we have high standards, we have high expectations. Let's always look behind, though, an issue. If someone's not performing the way that we want them to, let's try to take a deeper dive and understand the nature of that issue. I've had conversations with, we had Google Meets the week before last, I believe it was, with all of our schools. So I talked to the teachers of all of our schools. And, we are going to take an extra hard look. If a student does not seem overly engaged or they're really not checking in, it's not a matter of us just saying, well, I guess we'll write that student off. He's or she's just, being lazy or whatever it is. It's incumbent upon us to take an extra look. It's incumbent upon us as a school district, as educators, to really try to understand the nature of a lack of engagement, to say, why is it that this child isn't maybe, engaging in the way that they should? It's not just, well, I guess they didn't do this and that's their problem. So, expect that we are going to, maybe, not even maybe, we are going to go the extra mile and try to understand the nature of it and try to problem solve. Again, unprecedented times, uncharted waters that we're in right now. So I just think it's very critical that we keep that in mind. So, did you have any others, Ms. Fowler?
I did. That actually goes with a question, wondering if our social workers, counselors, guidance office will be in the building, and if a parent, has questions or concerns, and the other one was about changing schedules.
Okay, so I'll answer both questions. So yes, our guidance department, our pupil personnel services staff, that's interesting title, but essentially that staff, that's your social workers, your psychologists, your counselors, your nurses, we will have people available to our students. So, if it's someone needs some social emotional support, or, family has questions or is struggling with something, you're going to have the same ability to reach out to them. Again, the venue that you utilize may look a little bit different. Maybe it's a phone call instead of an in-person face-to-face. And I will also say too that we're not saying that that's going to be the case until Thanksgiving. Okay, just as we're looking to target and bring back other, parts of the population into schools in a safe manner, that could also apply to bringing in families or students for in-person support. I think I mentioned in one of my prior virtual forums, we talked about the idea of students maybe that need physical therapy coming in live and in person to receive that therapy. Well, the same thing could be said for students that may need some counseling support. Again, we haven't made decisions yet because, frankly, we need to start the year. One of the premise that all of this is based on is that we know in some way, shape, or form, just based on the guidance that exists, that we are going to be in some fashion remote learning. All right, it's either hybrid or it's fully remote. Those are the options that we have right now. We want to be the best remote instructors possible. All right, so aside from the safety, we want to make sure that what we're delivering, and I say instructors, but also just it's about service delivery. All right, it's about being able to take care of our students because we know that we're going to have to do it. So I'm going to jump into that other question about the schedule changes. Yes, that's honestly, that's possible. I think what you would do, depending on what school it is, you're not talking elementary, typically speaking, it's usually going to be middle or high school. You start with the school counselor, and find out from them, okay, listen, my child is enrolled in this class, but I really want them enrolled in this class. Or you reach out, you follow your typical process that you would follow if you had a concern about a schedule. So from that standpoint, that's 100% still intact.
Another question is about lunch. Will lunch continue to be provided, and how will it be distributed?
Great question. So I'm just a little bit of a history lesson here. So last year there was an executive order that was issued by the governor that all school districts had to provide lunch to anybody 18 or under. You had to create pickup sites or drop-off sites essentially for people to be able to access lunch, breakfast and lunch. Actually, it's not just lunch. So how we are operating, again, fully remote start to the school year, how we are operating right now, that executive order does not exist. So we still have a legal obligation to offer a lunch, but people, if you pay for lunch, you're going to have to pay for it. It's not going to be free. We'll have a couple of different sites, cafeterias that we're operating out of. We'll make sure that we communicate that. And actually some lunch letters have already gone out, frankly, just letting people know what the process is. But we will, so if you want to, in theory, you could drive up to one of those sites and purchase a lunch from us. Now, if you are listed as free or reduced, okay, so if you qualify for a free and reduced lunch, we're actually working with our transportation department and our food services department to be able to deliver those lunches to your homes. That's going to be a bit of a lift, I can tell you, but it's something that we felt, with more people back at work, with kids, we're starting off the year remote, and with kids being home and, tied to schedules during the day, we felt it was appropriate that we find ways to get food to them. So that means that's a substantial number of people, in this district that we're going to be driving around delivering lunches to. We're still working out some of the logistical details with that. And also, I would note that if you're a family that is not interested, we've already gotten feedback from some families that they're not interested in receiving the free lunch. Please let us know so we don't just keep coming to your house and dropping it off on the front step and having it go to waste. Certainly we would give those lunches elsewhere. But so basically, yes, we are still running a lunch program. Only now it's not free to everyone as it was before. So if you've qualified under the category of free or reduced, we'll be driving it to you. If you're not, then you'd have to drive to one of our locations to purchase lunch. So
I think there's one more. What happens if a teacher is out for the day?
Great question. Yeah, great question. So I'm going to tell you that we do have substitutes. We've actually secured preferred building substitute teachers. This isn't something new. We've actually had this in the past where we have teachers that are able to float in and be able to cover outages. I mean, when you think about any of our buildings, we do have substitute needs on a daily basis, even if it's just for a period or if a teacher has to go to a meeting or something, a school-based meeting, or if a teacher's ill. So we will work to be able to cover our classes to the extent possible. Our ideal is that somebody else would be physically present. There could be some times when it could be a combination of maybe another teacher checking in with a student, with a class, and possibly some pre-recorded materials. But these are conversations we're actively having with our teachers just so that they can include them in things like substitute plans. All teachers have substitute plans, and all teachers, by the way, teachers don't typically like to miss school because they want to be in front of their kids to the extent possible. So that's where you see those substitute plans being critical. So because when they come back, they know they want to be able to just pick up as smoothly as possible. So it's going to probably be a combination of a person checking in with your students, but also possibly some pre-recorded materials as well. So.
Last question too that just came in was, will there be another virtual forum before we start to bring kids back to school?
Yes. So school starts next Tuesday, so I'm not anticipating any more virtual forums before next Tuesday, but I do plan on communicating with some more forums. I also want to keep our community and our families and our staff up to date on some of the progress we're making and being able to bring people back. So, I would expect, whether it be virtual forums, I definitely plan on doing some more of these, but I also plan on just sending out communications to our families, letting them know kind of the state of the state and what's going on and what we've been able to accomplish. Things are moving very quickly, I can tell you, around the area. If anybody's been paying attention to the news, it appears as though our infection rate has gone up a little bit. I know there was some increased testing that took place over the weekend. I think it's still taking place now over the next couple of days from the state level, but we're not doing the testing. I know that was put out there before. School districts are not testing. That's the health department that does that. But I can tell you that's the sort of information we'll obviously be monitoring and continuing to work with the health department on. It's going to be important information like that anything that we have, we're going to want to make sure that we're communicating with our families. So I will tell you that, from that standpoint, it's going to be, critical that we do continue to have these sort of virtual forums. And they may start to take a different shape as well. So any other questions jumping in? Or are we?
No, those seem to be the themes that are coming in.
Okay. So I had a question too, somebody had put out there about Power School, or Parent Portal. So one of the key tools that we have for parents to stay connected to schools and to understand their child's progress is our Parent Portal. Teachers enter grades into our Power School system, which parents then view through the Parent Portal. So people were saying, hey, I'm having some difficulty being able to access the Parent Portal. A couple of thoughts there. One is that in our Go page that I've been referring to, we actually have step-by-step instructions for being able to change or alter information in the Parent Portal, if it's a phone number or something along those lines, or creating a new account. But also, I would say that if you ever have questions about the Parent Portal or about getting access to it, start with your building. Contact the school, reach out to the school, find out information from the school regarding what specifically, what your questions are. They should be able to help you out there. What else do we have here? Make sure I'm hitting everything here. Oops. Keep doing that. I apologize. One of the things I think I just want to take an extra moment just to focus on a little bit is just, the utilization of devices. So again, with our Chromebooks, students, again, we're strongly recommending that you use the devices that we issue you. But I know that I got a number of questions from people that have a greater level of comfort with their own devices. I would just say that, again, it's not that you can't use your own devices. but I would say that, you may have a decreased level of functionality. If you start off the year, it might be good to start off the year with using our Chromebooks, kind of get a sense for, how things are going to work. And then, as you feel comfortable, maybe then to transition over, if you really feel that strongly about it, to transition over to your own personal device. So, but again, it probably is advisable to start off the year using our own Chromebooks and our own devices. So, okay. Do we have any other questions coming in?
A couple questions just came in regards to team-based colors in the middle school. I think these are some specific questions related to following the schedules.
Okay. So I know, for instance, that, like when I was at West Middle School as a principal, the teams were labeled like Team 7A. Well, that's 7th grade Team A. There was 7A, B, and C. So they just use different colors. It's East Middle School that uses different colors, to my knowledge, to be able to describe the different teams. That's all. So it's just a way of categorizing people.
I think I just would want to add, if anyone has any questions about the schedule, they can contact their counselor to go over the specifics.
There's a lot of information, I will say, coming out that is in the process of coming out, even since some of these questions have been asked. I know because some of them are a few days old, but there's a lot of things coming out right now. The elementaries, the secondaries have sent out detailed letters talking about processes for the start of the school year. So there's quite a bit of information coming out now. Just keep an eye on the mail, keep an eye on your email.
Same with Chromebook distribution.
Chromebook distribution as well. Yes, absolutely. So again, we're focusing on the secondary this week, and then next Tuesday we're going to be focusing on the elementaries. So, okay. So again, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to be able to tune in today. We had some great questions. And again, just to answer that one question, this is not the last time we're going to be doing some sort of virtual forum. We will continue to take questions. I think it's going to be important for us to continue to communicate, how things are progressing. Again, you can never go wrong by reaching out to your child's school if you do have specific questions. I'm answering a lot of my questions very globally and broadly, but if you have very sort of granular questions about schools, about schedules and things like that, I would strongly encourage you to reach out to your schools. But I would also say, at this point in time, give them a little bit of time. The information is coming out. I would say, and even into next week too. The start of the school year for any teacher, for any school, is always about, kind of just getting yourself set up with your procedures, expectations, and things like that. So, give a chance to the teachers in our schools to be able to communicate some of this information, and for your teachers to be able to engage with the students. Teachers will be reaching out to students. Students and families are going to start receiving communications. I think things will start to look a little bit less abstract. And they will make a little bit more sense to you once you kind of get in the mix of it. So, but again, I want to thank all of our staff, all of our families, the Board of Education, for everyone's support in being able to make the start of the school year what I believe is going to be very successful. So I look forward to doing another one of these forums again. I look forward to seeing as many people in person as I possibly can. And to everyone, stay safe. And Ms. Fowler, thank you for being here today. Mr. Pacer, who's doing our AV support today, I appreciate your time as well. So thank you, everyone, and have a good day.